This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. The next 60 minutes will run through the business news stories you need to know about on the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets for you. Nigeria's equities have been having a rather rough February. They've fallen by over 5% so far this month. MT in Nigeria nearly 6% higher so far, but it's plateaued for the bulk of February, essentially unchanged even today. The Nasdaq does continue its slump. It's down 600 points since the 19th of February. It's still positive so far in the month, but only barely so. The bulk of the gains made earlier on in Feb essentially wiped out. Jumia, the Africa-focused e-commerce outfit, will release its full year results for 2020 tomorrow. You can expect a summary of those on the program. Here's what's coming up tonight. Tanzania says it's on course to join the fastest growing economies on the continent. Sudan banks on foreign exchange floats to shore up dwindling reserves. And Facebook strikes a last-minute deal with Australia on news content. Our starting point of this hour is in Tanzania. The central bank over there is confident that economic growth targets will be realized despite the economic damage caused by the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide. Last year, Tanzania revised its growth target for 2020 much lower, from just under 7% to 5.5%. The central bank expects GDP growth of 6% or more in 2021. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the economy grew by 5.7% in the first quarter of 2020, followed by 4% and 4.5% in the following quarters. Fourth quarter data is yet to emerge. During the third quarter, construction activities recorded the highest growth, followed by transportation and storage, information and communication, as well as professional, scientific and technical services. Now, back in August, Tanzania became one of the first 4 countries with which Russia resumed flights after the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, apparently, it's turning out to be one of the most popular destinations for Russian tourists, since it's one of the few warm, sunny places they can get to. Flights from Tanzania or Zanzibar now leave from 8 different cities in Russia. They're helping to keep Tanzania's tourism industry alive. Stuart Smith has this story from Moscow.
It's not hard to see why some Russians would rather be elsewhere at this time of year. In Moscow, temperatures hover between -10 and -20 degrees Celsius. Snowstorms and slippery pavements can make even going to the shops an expedition. But for those who prefer an adventure in warmer climes, Oksana Mornova offers tours outside Russia, like to Tanzania, from where she's just returned. There, it's nearly 50 degrees hotter.
They were totally like it. They were very happy to climb Kilimanjaro. They like too much Victoria Lake. They like too much African wine.
No snow, no ice, and few COVID-19 precautions.
It's not like this, and every way not saying please put mask for your safety, and every way like here if you go in supermarket, if you go in metro, every way you can listen that. In Africa, not like this. It's more free.
For many visitors unafraid of getting COVID, that's a plus. But without the pandemic happening, one tour operator doesn't think there would have been nearly so much interest from Russians.
In a different reality, most of the tourists who went this season would not have chosen Tanzania. It was a really unknown destination for tourists. Finding a hotel was impossible due to the high flow of tourists from Europe.
It's become a very popular destination. One tour operator estimates over 100,000 Russians will have visited Tanzania during Russia's winter season between November and March. And while Russian tourists boost their vitamin D, their rubles boost the Tanzanian economy.
Russians are saving our economy now after the European destination started to shake due to the COVID-19. So Russian is taking place because we say Tanzania is free from COVID-19, and the Russians have seen it and they're coming a lot.
Operators hope that now Tanzania is on the map for Russians, they'll see it as a top destination for a long time to come. Stuart Smith, CGTN, Moscow.
For the South, Zambia produced 882,000 tonnes of copper last year. That's up 13% compared to 2019's total output. The Mines Minister, Richard Musukwa, is describing it as a historical high for Africa's second largest copper producer. Zambia aims to produce more than 900,000 tonnes of copper this year, and it has a long-term goal of exceeding 1 million tonnes in annual output. Now, a worldwide shift to more electric cars, which tend to use a lot more copper than vehicles using traditional combustion engines, is partly expected to boost demand for the metal over the medium term. Zambia's cobalt production, however, did fall by over 20% in 2020 to just 287 tonnes. Zimbabwe's central bank has raised its policy rate as it aims to cut annual headline inflation to no more than 10% by the end of 2021. Here's Farai Mokutuya with this update.
The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe has revised its quarterly reserve money growth target from 25% to 22.5% as it aims to maintain exchange rate stability and continue the downward inflation trend. It's raised lending rates to tighten money supply and encourage productive use of funds.
From June 22 to December, the loans to the productive sector increased by 82 billion, having been 37 billion in June. So that's a huge increase, and you have to cap that, because what you don't want to do, you don't want to put too much money into the system so that it overheats. So he has to make it a little more expensive for companies to borrow, so that when they borrow, they really think about borrowing and they are going to put it in productive sector.
The move to raise lending rates may also affect the equities market, which has been offering inflation-beating returns, which had enticed some people to borrow funds to invest there. The central bank said 70% of the $795 million disbursed by the foreign currency auction since its launch in June was spent on raw materials, machinery and equipment. It's doubled the individual cash withdrawal limits, a move analysts say will enhance transaction convenience. Monetary authorities also confirmed the imminent release of a $50 banknote, which they say should not stoke inflation. However, as has been observed in the past, sentiment and not necessarily economic fundamentals play a part in driving inflation here.
When you have a huge informal sector, it's very difficult to use formal tools and formal economic policy to try and collect the informal sector. And that is the challenge that the Reserve Bank will always face. We have seen, for example, inflation spiking regardless of the rate stabilizing. It indicates that the activity, economic activity in the informal sector is not ruled by what the formal sector is doing.
Foreign currency inflows for 2020 were $6.3 billion, up from $5.5 billion the previous year, propelled by a record diaspora remittances of over $1 billion, justifying calls for more concerted efforts to encourage the economic participation of Zimbabweans abroad. Farai Mokutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's get back to the story we started the hour with. Tanzania's growth forecast, at least for this year and last year as well. The forecast for 2020 pre-COVID was just under 7%. That was later cut down to around 5.5%. Essentially, the Bank of Tanzania believes that the country can get back to being among some of the fastest growing economies on the continent. But how exactly do the numbers stack up? Let's find out. Gabriel Mongonda is an economic analyst who joins us now live from Dar es Salaam. Gabriel, to hit that 5.5% growth forecast for 2020 by the Bank of Tanzania, the last quarter of 2020 needs to have an amazing rate of growth, close to 8%. Do you think that forecast is feasible?
Yeah, that forecast could be feasible if some monetary and fiscal policy changes might be done well, because Tanzania, if we remember very well, we didn't close and lock down the country. So many economic activities went on as if nothing was happening. So that fueled a lot of economic growth when it was when it came to the second quarter of the 2020. Now, why we are saying that? Because the construction sector went on and it exceeded the last year performance. and the agricultural sector was as well growing at a very good pace. You go to the mining sector, it was the leading sector. Actually, it replaced the tourism sector as a foreign earner, #1 foreign earner sector in the country. So this figure of 8% could be feasible if some changes could take place. But if things will remain as they are, things might not go as planned. But the introduction of the COVID vaccine around the world is bringing some fresh breath to the world economy, which is nose down as we are talking right now. So we're expecting that the people that we used to sell our tourism packages to will be free from coronavirus, and they will start coming to our areas for tourism, and some markets in the world will start to be opened, and most of them are opening right now. Most of the economies are opening right now. So, and you know that Tanzania is not an island. We are living together with a lot of other countries, and most of them are our business partners. So we expect a lot of business coming up this quarter.
Let's focus a bit on that tourism sector, because looking at the data from the BOT, the tourism sector contracted by around 15% in the second quarter, 25% in the third quarter of the year. And of course, air transport links were basically shut down for the most part around the world in the last quarter and the second half, really, of 2020. So is it even feasible to be talking about a recovery in tourism at this point in time, when countries, source markets in Europe, in the United States, are still struggling to get their vaccination programs off the ground?
Yeah, of course, it's very difficult, but it was very something which up to today we are still not yet to comprehend it, because as you have, I think you have seen, the Zanzibar tourism sector has been growing significantly. As of now, the number of rooms that are available in Zanzibar are very few, because some Russians and some other countries like Italy and other part of the world are flocking into Zanzibar by huge numbers. And we don't know why exactly they're doing that, but the sector in Zanzibar is growing tremendously. We don't know exactly what caused that. Is it that because we announced that we do not have coronavirus in Zanzibar or in Tanzania as general? That one we leave it to the authorities, but it is possible to get back to the area position that we used to have, though it could take a lot of time for us to regain the previous position that we had before. As you have seen, some economic sectors in those first world which we do expect a lot of tourism to come from, that is Italy, the US, the UK, and the Germans, they're still struggling to recover from the downturn that we observed in 2020. So as we are trying to get back to the position that we used to, it could take some considerable amount of time to regain our position.
Right. The central bank did argue in its last MPC statement that the economy, as you pointed out, benefited from the decision of not imposing a nationwide lockdown of some sort. But are some sort of restrictions likely this year as Tanzania finally ramps up its fight against the pandemic?
Obviously, that's not possible to happen, and the president has announced already that there will be no lockdown in Tanzania, and it's very difficult for someone to change a strategy that he seemed to work in the previous wave that was from March last year towards June last year. We were hit badly by coronavirus, but we never locked our businesses down. It's only that schools were closed, and some tournaments were closed, and some sports events were closed. But almost all the economic activities were open and going as planned. And I do not think that Tanzania could close down any economic activities or do a lockdown as a measure, because the president doesn't believe in that, and even the people are not ready to do that. And it worked last year, and I think it's it would look awkward for him to get back to a strategy that seemed not to work because it was applied by other countries. There are so many countries which locked down, and that strategy didn't work well economically because Corona hit our health, which is fundamental, and Corona hit our economies, which is fundamental as well. So our president is like, he said, we cannot be hit twice by very fundamental stuff, health and economy. So let us protect ourselves, but there will be no lockdown this year. Right. Having said so, that means economic activities like mining, construction, and others will go on as planned.
Okay, so one last question for you. Tanzania did seek, and it actually received, debt relief from the IMF last year. But given that roughly 70-odd% of the country's $25-odd billion in public debt is held externally, does the country need more debt relief, if not this year, in the medium term?
Yeah, the country needs debt relief. I can tell you for sure, the monthly collection that we do locally, I mean, the taxes that the government collects on a monthly basis is around 1.5 to 2 trillion on a monthly basis. But almost over 20% of those revenues goes to debt repayments. So if those countries, the lenders that have lent money to us, if they would have to say, we are going to defer these repayments of loans, or we are going to just like forgive us repaying those rents, that means a huge amount of money that was supposed to go out of the country to repay the debts will be spent locally. And you and I understand that the only solutions of making sure that the country goes on is with the people to flourish is by spending and reducing taxes. So if the government would save those money and spend it to some other infrastructure projects or any other capital nature expenditures like the infrastructure construction, the mining sector, the healthcare systems, and so on, that means our economy will flourish more. So we really need this debt relief, and we really need it to work as a catalyst to upgrade our economic systems.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Gabriel Mongonde there, a political and economic analyst in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Time now for a run through some company headlines. Harmony Gold, South Africa's largest domestic gold miner, is preparing for growth after a 2/3 increase in interim profit, declaring a strong dividend and cutting debt. Harmony's gold production received a boost during the 6 months ending in December from the over $231 million purchase of AngloGold Ashanti's underground and tailings retreatment operations, adding extra ounces to output in October. WPP Scan Group's board has suspended the CEO, Bharat Thakra, and the CFO of the business, Satyabrata Das, as well. The board of directors said this measure allows investigations into allegations of gross misconduct and possible offences in their capacity as senior managers of the firm. Bharat will be replaced by an interim COO, Alec Graham. Spotify says it'll nearly double its market presence by setting up shop in 85 new markets in the next few days, making the streaming service, and of course a podcast service as well, available to more than 1 billion people around the world. The company's shares, which are down in early trading, reversed course to rise by as much as 6% to a record high. The Swedish company started its services more than a decade ago. It's currently available in 93 countries. It has 345 million monthly active users. And Elon Musk has been knocked off the top spot. He's no longer the world's richest person after Tesla's shares slid by 8.6% on Monday, cutting his net worth down by over $15 billion. Tesla's largest decline since September was fueled in part by Musk's comments over the weekend that the prices of Bitcoin and its smaller rival, Ethereum, do seem high. His message came 2 weeks after Tesla announced that it had added $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin to its balance sheet. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's on the other side. Sudan banks on foreign exchange floats to show up dwindling reserves. And the on-demand delivery company Glovo is expanding its presence on the continent.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Sudan has announced some pretty radical changes to its exchange rate over the weekend. The government says it will abandon its long-standing and deeply unsustainable fixed exchange rate in favor of a managed float. At 55 Sudanese pounds to the dollar, the official exchange rate had diverged wildly from that in the parallel market, where the currency was trading nearly 8 times higher. CGTN's Wanja Mungai takes up that story.
Staggering levels of inflation in Sudan have meant aid groups have at times had to pay 7 times market rates. But on Sunday, the government decided to float the currency, a move aimed at closing the widening gap between the official and black market exchange rates. The policy shift announced by the central bank comes at a time thousands in Sudan are grappling with an inflation rate that topped 300% last month. Protests have flared in recent weeks in several regions over skyrocketing prices, alongside bread and medicine shortages.
If we float the pound and try to embellish the issue, it is not a solution. And the only solution is national production. The Sudanese economy was a free economy, and the reason was that Sudanese people were working in the field of production.
The exchange rate policy shift also comes amid concerns that Sudan's foreign currency reserves are near exhaustion. Economists argue that if the central bank is to be successful in drawing transactions away from the black market, then reserves need to stand at around $5 billion.
I think the negatives are the sharp rise in inflation, which is the most important negative of this decision. And in the short term, the prices will increase very much, but they will decline again when the supply of foreign exchange increases in banks and the economy in general. The most important is the grinding price tag in light of the decline in capacity. Purchasing for Sudanese consumers, getting to the basics will become very difficult and a real challenge for families in the short term.
Closing the yawning gap between the official and black market rates is central to a reform program agreed last year with the International Monetary Fund. The move was delayed for months as shortages of basic goods and rapid inflation complicated a fragile political transition. To meet key demands from leaders, Sudan last year lifted most fuel subsidies. Another move Khartoum hopes will unlock debt relief, aid and foreign investment. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Amidst all the damage inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic, South Africa's restaurant industry is now appealing to the government to assist them with funding. Most establishments in Africa's most industrialized economy reopened last September. But as CGTN's Sumitra Naidu now reports, the 5-month lockdown and the ongoing pandemic restrictions have made things pretty difficult as far as returning to normal is concerned.
While hotels, restaurants and pubs are allowed to operate, COVID is an ongoing concern for patrons. Many are still afraid to travel or eat out. Fewer customers and constrained spend has left restaurant and bar owners out of pocket. Many are struggling with overheads that they no longer can afford.
It is very difficult to try to enforce any company or private person to actually extend any form of leniency or a loan or some form of holiday on any company. So there's no legal obligation for anyone to listen to anyone. We've also got to look from a landlord's point of view. And from their point of view, a lot of them might have loans, mortgages, bonds, and unfortunately, they're geared highly. So they depend on that income. And that's why they've put the pressure on the tenants.
Last month, the government launched a tourism equity fund to assist the industry, but this is aimed at new acquisitions or developments and expansion projects. But the restaurant industry in particular says it needs money to survive. Rent and salaries need to be paid.
So the main thing the government did was provide some form of income for your employees by UIF. So there were mixed successes with that, but this is nothing in comparison to what was done in other countries like the UK, for example. Every single registered business got money. They gave interest-free loan for a year, and it was initially going to be payable over 6 years. They've just now extended that to 10 years. So that would have made a massive difference to our really devastated industry.
Adding to the pressure, new rules were introduced for the restaurant and food outlet industry last month. Owners have to pay a wage to all employees that exceeds the national minimum wage, grant employees wage increases of 1.5% above inflation, and give employees a December bonus as well as weekly payments to clean their uniforms. Unfortunately, for many, the impacts of COVID have been too devastating. Hundreds of new and old establishments have closed their doors permanently. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to logistics. The metro-focused on-demand delivery firm Glovo is venturing into a segment known as Q-commerce, or quick commerce if you want to use its full term. In a nutshell, the latest service edition aims to deliver pretty much everything you can think of within cities in 30 minutes or less. But in order to achieve that, the Barcelona-based firm has now developed dark stores. These are essentially warehouses where retailers can house goods that are only sold online. Glovo's partnered with Unilever, Nestle and L'Oréal for the service, and supermarket chains like Walmart and Carrefour. During the pandemic, Glovo's had to meet increasing demand for next-day deliveries, and it's been looking to improve service delivery with the aid of machine learning. All right, then let's get an update on how delivery firms are doing in some frontier markets across the continent. Rodrigo Ali is the Regional General Manager covering Eastern Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Glovo. He joins us live on the program tonight. Rodrigo, good to have you on the program. Can you give us a sense of what business has been like in the 8 African countries you operate in across the African continent? Is food delivery still king, or has the mix of revenues diversified a bit?
Well, I mean, the last year has been a quite intense year. I mean, first of all, we had to adapt our operations immediately. You know, when the global outbreak, when the global pandemic exploded, we really had to adapt our operations, you know, first of all, to comply with the local regulations to ensure that we were, you know, working hand to hand with governments. And the second one, adapting, you know, to the reality, you know, to ensuring that we were having all the safety measures in place to make sure we were working properly with the couriers, with the different restaurants, platforms, and also, of course, you know, delivering the best service to our customers. No, the reality is like, yes, I mean, we as Glovo, we don't only position ourselves on the food delivery space. Even before the global outbreak, we were expanding really fast on categories such as the ones that you were mentioning as quick commerce. And reality is like, yeah, the global pandemic has accelerated certain categories such as groceries, where we have seen increasing penetration across all our markets in Africa. I would like to highlight 2 markets. One is Kenya, where we have a groceries penetration already above 30%. And also in Morocco, no, where actually, given the local regulation, we could only operate in other categories that were non-food related because all restaurants were actually shut down. So yes, there has been a shift, and we believe that this demand is here to, you know, it's gonna remain, and this dynamic is gonna stay there.
Give us a sense of how this quick commerce model is working, at least within the Kenyan context, because I mean, it's your typical crowded urban environment. Addressing systems are not exactly the most developed around here. So how do you set up that quick commerce logistics chain in a place like Nairobi?
I mean, first of all, it's having strong partners in place. I mean, in a market like Kenya, we have been partnering with strong partners such as Naivas, such as Carrefour, and many other retailers. I mean, having that partnership is key, because those brands, you know, at the end, we offer them an ultimate solution that we're going to be the last mile delivery, and we're going to be doing their deliveries in less than 45 minutes. I think that's a quite unique value proposition that Kenyan consumers have been receiving quite well from day one, no? And the second area where actually we're exploring as well is like, we know that we can eventually do even ultra fast delivery, launching our own dark hubs, let's say our own dark stores, where we could eventually place our deliveries and deliver under 30 minutes. So we are seeing those two opportunities, basically working with retailers and partnerships across Kenya, and we keep expanding on that through new partnerships, and then also doing, our own operations ourselves as well, to even going further on the ultra fast delivery.
Kenya, of course, did introduce a digital services tax, 1.5% on the gross value of the transaction, effective from the 1st of January. How are you applying that across your operations?
I mean, we're complying with the local regulations, so that's a tax we're complying with, of course. But then we're not passing this cost anyhow to to any of our users of our platform, and we keep ensuring operations keep running as usual, and we're not making any changes, as we believe affordability in times as the ones that we're living right now, it's key, and we passing this cost to consumers is not currently responsible for something we should do.
So whose balance sheet is it landing on? If it's not going to consumers, is it on your balance sheet or your suppliers?
It's in we're in investment mode, so now we're looking at we're looking at it as an investment. We believe that the return of this, with the growth we're seeing, we will see it as an attractive investment. So we're looking in the long run, not only in the short term.
Indeed. So you're in 8 countries in Africa. Your most recent additions are Ghana and Uganda. Walk us through the opportunity you saw in those markets.
I mean, first of all, after the successes of markets like Morocco, Kenya, and Cote d'Ivoire, we realized, hey, in Africa, there's many opportunities that we should tackle. And where we realized there were really, a lot of markets where the competitive landscape, the on-demand delivery market was not saturated. And we consider that as a blue ocean. We consider that as a great opportunity for us to go there and expand, because demand was there and we had to keep expanding. Plus, also, we identify a lot of synergies between the markets we were on. As you were saying, we recently opened Uganda and Ghana, and the reality is that we have a lot of partnerships that are shared across the region. Also, we have many other services like that, the customer service that, for example, the customer service and the different live operations that we provide to our users in Ghana and Uganda, for example, are provided by Kenya. So we find a lot of synergies that allow us to give us the scale to launch them fast and become the leader on-demand delivery player on these markets.
Nigeria, notably absent from that particular list of countries. Why is that?
So no, I mean, Nigeria is a market that we're actually exploring. It's a very interesting market. It still, gathers all the 3 points that I was mentioning before. We believe that competitive landscape, still is a good opportunity, and there's a space for a player like Globo to enter. There's a lot of synergies as well, and also we're seeing a lot of appetite for different partners. So I mean, we see it as a big opportunity. It's a big market. A lot of we have a macro urban, with Lagos, and we believe that it would be a natural expansion for us to go there at some point.
When would that some point be? Second half of the year?
I mean, we're looking at this year, to be honest. So hopefully in Q2 or early Q3, we would like to be there, definitely.
Okay, one last question for you. Dark kitchens. This has emerged as an interesting niche in other markets, in Europe and in some parts of the United States. Might that have growth potential in the 8 countries that you're operating in across Africa?
I mean, yes, as long as, we see, again, that partners, the restaurants that we're currently operating in, they see also this as an opportunity to keep expanding their operations. Now we're in a business of tight margins, and restaurants as well. And at the end, it's like we're identifying and working hand to hand with them to make sure, as long as, they want to keep expanding because, the on-demand delivery trend, they keep having, their kitchens saturated. And as long as that opportunity arises, it's an opportunity that we're exploring actually with some of our partners. Currently, we don't have any dark kitchen in Africa, but actually it's an opportunity that we're already exploring, and we're making progress towards that.
Rodrigo Allier from Glovo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, let's head over to Egypt. State-owned oil and gas firms over there are set to launch a new bidding round for exploration contracts by the end of the month. Egypt recently signed 9 exploration agreements with 6 local and international oil firms in January. Those contracts collectively are worth more than $1 billion. Yasser Hakim has the details on the upcoming auction.
The auction for oil and gas exploration is expected to cover 24 areas, 12 in the Eastern Desert, 9 at the Mediterranean Sea, and 3 at the Red Sea. Petroleum Minister Tariq Al-Murla said state-run firms, Egyptian General Petroleum Corporation Company and the Egyptian Natural Gas Holding Company, plan to launch the tender by the end of February. Egypt has been attracting a growing number of international oil and gas giants, in its latest auctions.
Recently, big firms entered Egypt for the first time, like ExxonMobil and Chevron in the Red Sea, as well as Shell, Mubadala and other companies, because Egypt has become attractive to them. Now, first of all, the security and stability is a factor. We have seen how investments dropped to zero from 2011 to 2013, when there was no security in the country. Now, secondly, since the first petroleum exploration in 1809, only 40% of Egypt has been excavated. 60% of the country's territory is still to be explored for oil and gas. Also, the profit-sharing terms with the government are favorable to the private firms.
In the last few years, Egypt has managed to be self-sufficient in natural gas, thanks to the discovery of the Zohr gas well, which is the largest in the Mediterranean Sea. New gas explorations are meant to increase exports through the country's reopened LNG plants. Cairo hopes the same for oil and petrol production.
For oil, we produce around 650 to 660,000 barrels per day. Our consumption is more, so we have a deficit. We also have a deficit in petroleum products production, but the government says by 2023 we will be self-sufficient in petroleum products.
And with 60% of the country still to be explored, foreign firms should expect many more auctions to come to cover Egypt's oil and gas needs for the next few years. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
We're just past 18:30 GMT, time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. Facebook strikes a last-minute deal with Australia around paying for news content. And China vows to increase support in emerging industries. The details coming up shortly.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. The Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, a Hutu rebel group, has denied allegations that it was behind the killing of the Italian ambassador to the DRC. In a media statement received by international news agency AFP, the FDLR has instead accused the armies of the DRC and Rwanda of being behind the attack. The Italian ambassador to the country, Luca Atanasio, died from his wounds on Monday after an attack in Goma. Over Nigeria, a COVID-19 antibody survey in Nigeria suggests that some 4 million people in Lagos State alone had the virus last year. The study was done on some 10,000 people in 4 Nigerian states. It was to estimate the extent of the spread of COVID-19 in Africa's most populous nation. This seroprevalence survey was carried out in September and October by Nigeria's Center for Disease Control and the Institute for Medical Research. And further afield, Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, saw relatively peaceful protests on Tuesday. Businesses resumed operations after Monday's general strike. Supermarkets, restaurants and shopping malls recovered. Workers have returned to factories. There still are protests, however, on main roads in the embassy districts, where most of the protesters are young people. They're using music and paintings to express their dissatisfaction with the military coup d'etat. That's a run through your headlines. Facebook says it has struck a deal with lawmakers in Australia to pay local publishers for their news content. Now, this development comes after the government agreed to change some of the terms within its new media code. The agreement ends Facebook's temporary ban on sharing news links on its platform within the country. Facebook imposed that measure unilaterally on the 19th of February, sharply escalating the row with the government. Data show that the link sharing ban caused news traffic to plummet In the region, today's policy change also ends Facebook's global ban on user sharing links to Australian news publishers. Australia's new law would have effectively forced Google and Facebook to pay Australian news publishers for content if they were not able to come up with payout agreements with local publishers themselves. All right, then let's get an update on this evolving story with a perspective from the United States. Jim Spellman joins us now from Washington, D.C. Jim, how are lawmakers in Washington viewing this chain of events in Australia?
Well, this is being watched very closely by lawmakers here in Washington. There's been a lot of pressure to reform these big tech companies, not only Facebook and Google, but also Twitter, Amazon, etc. Not only for online revenue, but also for what responsibilities these platforms may have for content that's posted on them. This came to a head during the election here last fall, of course, when you saw President Trump and others banned from Twitter, banned from Facebook, etc. The discussion really is, what is the responsibility for these companies have in the marketplace? And I think that that's not determined yet, but people here in the United States definitely feel that it's time for some sort of change. So you can expect lawmakers, policymakers here to be watching closely to see how this plays out. Ramah?
Indeed, and of course the age-old debate of whether or not they're publishers or platforms. But let's zero in on Facebook. Why was it so bitterly opposed to paying publishers for the news content that they produce, given that, at least in Australia, I mean, they've taken up 80% of the digital ad spend between themselves and Google?
Yeah, so I think there's two things at play. Of course, there's money. No company wants to pay money if they can choose to not pay money. But I think it goes deeper than that, and it goes to control. So one of the main objections Facebook had is that if they're not able to come up with an agreement with a given media outlet, then a government-determined binding arbitration board would rule what rate they had to play. They were really reluctant to give up that sort of power to any kind of outside agency in a binding way. So what you saw here really was Facebook flex its muscle, show how important Facebook is in the media landscape. You saw, as you mentioned, the huge impact it had when these news outlets were no longer on Facebook. This is simply driving the media landscape these days. So again, you saw Facebook flex its muscle here. But I think that there's this balance between these social media platforms like Facebook, between the content creators, between the users, between the governments. And there's a growing sense that it has been out of balance for too long in favor of these big tech companies. But in the meantime, all these years that basically they've been able to operate without having to pay revenue for a lot of these issues, for not having to have the obligations to be responsible for what's posted, they've now accumulated so much power that, as you're seeing in Australia, it's just simply difficult to add regulations to this environment at this point. Ramah?
Indeed, and of course you could also make the argument that perhaps in showing their hand as forcefully as they have in Australia, it might essentially tip the scales against them. But would a solution similar to what the Australians are implementing now, would that be viable in the United States? Because I mean, in theory, as you said, yes, there's a money element to it, but Facebook could pass on the payments, the cost of these payments to publishers onto digital advertisers.
That's one of the problems here, and it's if you're an online publisher and you count on Facebook to post content for people to share it, etc., then you can see where you might want to be paid for that content. But without the platform, are you going to get as many clicks? So you're back to that issue of balance. I think it is inevitable in the United States that there will be more revenue created from these companies. Will it ultimately be passed along to the content, to the user somehow? I think that's extremely likely. I think the bigger questions are what I mentioned when we began this chat about the responsibilities these companies may face, because that's a potentially much bigger liability than essentially simply paying some sort of tax. So the federal government has been reluctant to do this, but you are seeing states individually create taxes on things like online advertising, digital advertising, and those seem to be moving forward. Okay, the tech companies seem to be willing to accept that up to a degree. You're also going to be closely watching Canada, who's moving forward with similar measures as you're seeing in Australia. But I think we still just don't know in the United States what we want these companies to be. And I think that that is a discussion that really has to be had before you can then figure out how to regulate them. And this is not a situation where the users, the general public, is necessarily against something. I mean, look, people love Facebook, people love Amazon, people love Twitter. So these companies not only have a lot of power, but people use them as such a huge part of their everyday life that I think a lot of average Americans are going to begin the day at least somewhat on the side of platforms like Facebook, if the alternative is they're not able to see their content they want to see and share it with their people that are in their network. So I think there's a lot that's going to have to play out here. There is an appetite to do it, but how it actually ends up looking, I think, is a huge question mark, Ramah.
Indeed, treating Facebook, Twitter and the others essentially like utilities. Jim Spellman in Washington, thank you. Quick update as far as the market's judgment on Facebook is concerned. If you thought they were concerned about what happened in Australia, well, the price so far doesn't seem to indicate it. $263, up 1.33%. Now, on to China. The authorities over there have released new goals for the development of the country's state-owned enterprises. CGTN's Liu Jiaxin has the details.
Looking back at 2020, battered by the epidemic and a downturn in economy, China's government says its state-owned enterprises have delivered a satisfactory performance.
We still remember how in Wuhan, Hubei province, central enterprises built 2 hospitals in less than 2 weeks, produced urgently needed protective materials, and spared no efforts to ensure the supply of electricity, food, and fuel to stabilize market prices. Some also took the lead in vaccine research, providing much needed support in the fight against the pandemic.
China's state-owned enterprises achieved a net profit of 1.4 trillion yuan last year, up 2.1% since 2019. It's not a high growth rate, but officials say growth isn't easy in unfavorable conditions. In the country's 14th five-year plan, the government has vowed to expand its presence in forward-looking emerging industries and make market-based operations more flexible and efficient.
In 2021, we will continue to ensure net profits and total profits of central government enterprises grow faster than the national economy, while raising the operating income ratio, increasing the intensity of research and development investment, and overall labor productivity. We will keep the asset-liability ratio under steady control.
Officials said the state-owned enterprises are positioned to receive increasing support as they attempt to transform their business models and increase their competitiveness, both at home and abroad. Liu Jiaxin, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, before this unprecedented pandemic hit, Singapore's Changi Airport was the 7th busiest in the world. Last year, though, passenger traffic through it fell by over 80%. That's an eye-watering number, whichever way you look at it. But with an eye on the resumption of international business travel, the city-state has now rolled out a special facility for travelers. CGTN's Mira Liu has the details.
Business travelers from around the world will now be able to stay and safely conduct face-to-face meetings with their partners in Singapore. Aptly named Connect at Changi, the first of its kind facility allows inbound business travelers to enter Singapore without the hassle of the 14-day quarantine. But those who opt for the scheme won't be allowed to interact with the rest of Singapore. They have to remain confined within the facility during their stay and conduct business through these purpose-built, segregated meeting rooms.
For some, physical meetings are still important for securing and closing business deals and making important decisions. Prior to COVID-19, Singapore was a popular destination for such business meetings, and companies are turning to Singapore to safely resume these meetings.
It's designed to enable this kind of safe, contained engagements, conduct and host business meetings of many different kinds of description. These would include senior leadership meetings from a regional or a global leadership team. They could include multinationals wishing to hold group meetings here.
To ensure the health and safety of all visitors and employees, a variety of measures have been put in place. Locals who come down for business will have a separate entrance and a ventilation system, and all foreign visitors will have to undergo rigorous COVID testing throughout their stay.
They are bubble wrapped from the airport when they come to us, and they go individually to their rooms, and therefore they are already isolated in a sense. And they are PCR tested at the airport. They are PCR tested on day 3 and day 7 again.
The project is developed by a Temasek-led Singapore consortium and has currently been launched with 150 rooms and 40 meeting rooms. The Connect at Changi facility is just a stone's throw from the airport. This initiative aims to complement the existing travel lanes that Singapore has established with a number of countries to support its plan to gradually reopen its borders and to help revive its struggling aviation and tourism industry. Mira Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
A fruit farm in the Western Cape is home to South Africa's first floating solar power plant. This, in fact, is the first commercial-scale floating solar power plant on the continent. Tonight on What's Hot, CGTN's Travis Andrews explores how floating arrays of PV panels could double hydropower generation capacity, not just in South Africa, but across the continent.
Hydropower dams are the largest renewable energy source in Africa, but climate change is said to be hindering their potential. That's because evaporation is rendering some of the hydropower dams useless, but researchers argue there is a solution. Floating solar panels have been touted as the answer, because it will cut evaporation as well as tap energy from the sun for the grid. According to estimates, covering just 1% of reservoirs with solar panels could double the continent's hydropower capacity. It will also boost electricity generation by 50%.
When we focus on the issues that are related to climate change, would better, as Africa, invest in renewable energy. Therefore, hydropower is also a renewable energy. Therefore, if we use the floating systems on the dams, yes, we will reduce the evaporation.
By harnessing the sun's energy and that of hydropower turbines, millions of more households could be electrified. Across Africa, hydropower accounts for 17% of electrified generation, but that can be boosted with the technology.
That in the DRC, there's so much water that if they can invest in that hydropower, they'll be able to support many of the other neighboring countries.
South Africa has a number of lakes and dams that are prime locations for floating solar panels. That includes in South Africa's sun-rich Northern Cape. With a 20 to 25% premium over conventional installations, solar floating panels can be quite costly. But the electricity grid infrastructure already in place at hydropower plants bring down the connection costs and make it far more economically viable. There are also job opportunities that can be created through the manufacture of solar PV panels used in the installations.
I think that it is good to invest in these 50 new dams that can be used also for this hydropower. And whilst they are coming up with the 50 new dams, I would be very happy to see the PV systems being incorporated in the dams that they are building.
And so it becomes a strong business case that will also make the continent more resilient against climate change. With solar panel prices decreasing steadily, clean energy could become a greater part of the continent's energy mix as well. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Quick run through commodity prices. Let's start with coffee. We don't actually talk about that much on this program. Coffee futures, they've had a very interesting rebound in the second half of February. Taking today's 1.5% rise into account, these contracts have gone up by 6% so far in the year. Not exactly an outstanding number, however, compared to other things. Copper's bonkers rally, for example, it does continue, hitting 9.5-year highs, $9,305 a tonne in London today. We're looking at the biggest monthly rise in copper prices since August 2011, according to Bloomberg data. Also seeing a slight pullback in Brent crude today, down about 0.33% to $65 a barrel. Today's peak was around $66.74. Here's what's coming up next. Nigeria plans to inject $71 million to boost SMEs in the country.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
One last story for you in the hour. Authorities in Nigeria will provide some $71 million in financial support to SMEs in Africa's largest economy. This intervention is the second phase of a survival fund, if you will, aimed at cushioning businesses from the economic damage inflicted by this pandemic. As Kelechi Mekalam reports, Nigeria is focused on businesses involved in the production of PPEs, processed food and sanitary products.
This factory in Nigeria's capital is a one-stop shop for personal and household sanitary products, from disinfectants to hand sanitizers, soaps, window cleaners and scoring powder. The 3-year-old business boasts of 10 employees and has trained hundreds of youths in this line of trade. Although there's a wide market to profit from, the lack of funds to expand it is limiting its production capacity.
Manufacturing business is not what you just go into without having, a lot of machinery and funds on ground. So of challenges in the aspect of machines, like the scoring powder, oh my God, is the hardest to produce and the cheapest, in the sense that we don't have the machine for the turning of the powder, so we do that manually, and that machine packs almost 500 in 1 minute, but here we'll do manual packaging, and then it takes us more time.
Audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers reports that SMEs account for 96% of businesses in Nigeria, and they contribute about 50% to the national GDP. But the sector has been badly hit by the COVID-19 outbreak. Many businesses like this one have closed shop, leading to a spike in unemployment. And that's why the government is set to disburse about $70.8 million to SMEs. About 100,000 businesses across the country would benefit from this scheme, which focuses on local manufacturing.
It's going to go a long way for us because we're just startups. And then in this production business, there are a lot of machines and a lot of things that needs to be put in place.
Rather than depending on imported sanitizers, imported nose masks, we can begin to empower our people to produce all of these things. Fantastic idea. In the long run, it will have impact because it will help to stabilize the social assistance of the nation and by extension also affect the economic assistance.
The funding is expected to save at least 1.3 million jobs and impact over 35,000 individuals in each state. Experts urge government to keep a scorecard of the process in order to sustain its gains.
If the fund actually gets to the beneficiaries, it is massive, it is significant, it can engineer a significant turnaround in the sector. The question is, are those who really need the fund getting it? We ask, give us the list of the beneficiaries. Then you will begin to see gaps. And even if you carry out opinion polls on the streets, 90% of those who we interview will tell you they don't even know such assistance. Why? Because the information is not out there. The issues around transparency of these processes are not is a major flaw that we have identified in the process.
SMEs are key to Nigeria's economic lifeline, making up 80% of the nation's employment. With the intervention fund, government hopes to keep more businesses running and revive those that have suffered severe losses. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And on the day when Bitcoin fell back under $50,000, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.